Hello everybody and welcome back to Motor City Musings. Today we have something completely different. We are going to be driving a Bollinger B4 electric truck. And this is a first. Not just a first for this channel reviewing a manufacturer's vehicle, but also the first time this vehicle has been reviewed on camera on public roads. I will take you briefly through the background of Bollinger, how they have arrived at today, and how, unlike many other electric startups, vehicles are now in the hands of customers. We will talk about what a Class 4 truck is, its use cases, competition, etc. The B4 is an all-new, all-electric cab-over chassis cab that can be upfitted to suit the end user. So I'm going to start with a huge thank you to everybody at Bollinger for this unique opportunity, for inviting me, a little tiny channel, to come in, see their facility, see the vehicles, talk to people and drive them. So who are Bollinger and what is the Bollinger B4? Well, Bollinger was founded by Robert Bollinger in 2015. In 2017, they showed their first vehicle, the B1, and a couple of years later, they showed an updated version of that along with a new pickup version, the B2. As you can see, these looked more like a boxy pickup or large SUV vehicle. They were Class 3, and that is 10 to 14,000 pounds. Think F350. In 2018, they relocated to Michigan to be at the center of the automotive engineering talent and, very importantly, the infrastructure to build and develop the first prototypes as well as move forward to production. Now, I don't know all the details, obviously, but over the next couple of years, Bollinger made the decision to pivot away from Class 3 and instead focus on Class 4 trucks, and that is what the B4 vehicle is. Class 4 vehicles are defined by the government as having a maximum payload between 14 and 16,000 pounds. Once they had made the decision to go to the Class 4 vehicles, what they did in the next 2.5 years I frankly find amazing. I have spent my whole working life in the auto industry, and in that time, product development cycle times have come down dramatically. But still, 2.5 years is barely enough for a major manufacturer to do a mid-cycle refresh. Bollinger started with a clean sheet of paper and had the first production vehicles on the road in just over 2.5 years, and that is frankly outstanding. To be fair, there are less regulations for these large vehicles than there are for passenger vehicles, especially when it comes to things like crash. So it was an easier job. Also, they took the very sensible step of outsourcing major components to industry leaders like the battery pack, the axle, or the chassis cab. But at the end of the day, this vehicle comes in at over 70% US produced. That's very important, and I will come back to that later. So let's talk about Class 4 vehicles and what their use cases are. Now, the following couple of slides I have got from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. You can follow the link below and download your own data and cut it how you will. But I just want to show a couple of graphs here which I think fairly represent use cases for these types of vehicles. Let's first look at how fast and how far vehicles travel each day. In this graph, you can see I have tried to exclude unreasonable applications. I don't see too many school buses or snowplows mounted on cab-over chassis. You can see here the vast majorities of these vehicles across a sea of use cases is around about 10 miles an hour. In some cases up as much as 20 miles an hour, but over an 8 to 10 hour shift, that's anywhere from 1 to 200 miles, which is well within the range of an electric vehicle like this, even in the winter when it's colder and the range drops. The next one, you can see just Class 4 vehicles across all use cases. This time, again, most use cases are below 50 miles an hour or below 150 to 180 miles a day. I could go on, but the point is, realistically, the job that Class 4 vehicles do day in, day out tend to be urban, tend to be relatively short distances with low average speeds. And that is right in the perfect sweet spot for an electric vehicle. Now, sure, if you work on an oil field, on a ranch, out in the country, you're towing heavy equipment, etc., then of course a typical pickup style internal combustion engine vehicle is going to be the right choice for you. But I was looking at overall data for all of these types of vehicles, and there is undoubtedly a very good business case for an electric Class 4 vehicle. So now let's look at the vehicle itself. We'll start with a walk around and look at some of the major components. Here from the side we can see the battery packs. These are very well protected compared with diesel tanks on most ICE vehicles. The battery pack made by ONE is a lithium iron phosphate rather than the normal lithium iron, and while they can get hot and smoke, they do not burn and set on fire like a lot of other automotive battery packs. In this area we have the battery conditioning unit and the powertrain control modules. Behind that, the batteries we've talked about. At the rear, we have an off-the-shelf Dana e-axle. This has a 10,500 axle weight limit and an integrated 323 horsepower motor. While we are talking about the battery pack and the motor, let's talk charging. With a standard level 2 charger, which is the kind of thing a lot of people have installed at home for their electric cars, it takes 9 hours for a full charge. No problem if that's sitting idle overnight. Or, with a DC fast charger, it takes just 2.5 hours to add 185 miles of range, or you can go from 20 to 70% charge in just 45 minutes. Another interesting feature of the e-axle is the regen braking. Now, all electric vehicles have some kind of regen braking, but this is quite interesting. If you look, there are still full-size disc brakes at the rear. That means in the incredibly unlikely event of a high-voltage failure, you still have full braking and can bring the vehicle to a safe and controlled stop. Just behind the e-axle, there is the motor control unit that drives the motor based on driver input. Here is another bare chassis ready for upfitting. This one has got the optional EPTO, or electric power takeoff unit, that can run a variety of accessories. So, let's get in it. Okay, so pretty normal actually. We've got a column that can go up and down and tilt and move for me. So typical, as you call it, bus drivers, very flat. Let's lock this in position. And now we're ready to go. It's very, very simple. We just miss the brake pedal altogether. Foot on the brake, start it like a normal vehicle. Everything comes to life. And a normal rotary dial prindle will pop it into reverse, take off the brake, typical beeps being a commercial vehicle. Okay, let's back it up and see how this thing drives. Eerily quiet and smooth, as you would probably expect. And we turn it to drive, and then we will set off and see how it goes. Okay, so let's go and drive this thing on the road for real. I've been around the parking lot a couple of times, and so far it is very easy to drive. Seamless and quiet. View of the road is amazing. The steering is surprisingly direct. The brakes have got quite a long, soft pedal, but it's actually very easy to modulate and come into a stop. Very easy to stop with virtually no head nod as well, which surprises me. Now today we're going to do a mixed route that Bollinger used for testing the car daily. This is the kind of route that these vehicles would be used every day. We have a combination of city streets like we're on now, with a lot of stoplights, stop signs, turns and junctions. We're going to go down, we're going to do a short run on the freeway, then we're going to get off the freeway, come up a major highway, then back onto smaller streets. This is exactly the kind of work that these vehicles do. So now we're going to see what it is like actually merging and getting onto the freeway. I'm barely using the throttle. I'm sure I could be very irresponsible if I wanted to. So we're all used to ADAS systems on modern cars, lane departure, collision avoidance and things like this. Doesn't have exactly the same thing, but there is a lane warning departure. And so I'm just going to drift close to the line deliberately without my turn signal, and it will warn me. And there you go. So I'm cruising along at about 55, using relatively little throttle. The vehicle is still very, very responsive. Now, I'm not fully loaded. I believe I'm about half loaded. But I do know real-world use cases from Bollinger. They are hearing that most customers run out of space before they run out of actual vehicle load. So now we are back on city streets off of the freeway. It handled that easily with power to spare. And one thing, I said how easy it is right from the start to drive this, but I'm truly impressed. I haven't driven a cab over before. I haven't driven a Class 4 vehicle before, but I have spent a lot of time in things like a Ford F-350 or a Silverado 3500. They are a class down, and honestly, they feel more work to drive in an urban setting than this does. This is far easier to place, and especially when it comes to maneuvering and moving, backing in, deliveries, etc., I do believe that a cab over is probably the way to go. Not saying it's for everybody, but for the use case that it's designed for, I think it's great. So the ride, the primary ride, that's the pitch and roll, is very well controlled, far better than I expected it to be. The secondary ride, that's your impact motions. Initially, I thought they were a little harsh, but they do settle down very quickly and it gives you a better overall ride to my mind. So as we are driving, I have been chatting with Phil here about the ride and handling. He is the ride and handling engineer, and I'm amazed at how quickly they did the DV development on this vehicle. This is only about 6 or 9 months suspension tuning, yet it seems to be, from my unexpert opinion, very, very good. But more importantly, the feedback from customers and testers in the field is they really do seem to have it right, and I can understand that. I keep going on about how easy it is to drive. So we've done a few miles now, not too far, and we've done a couple of shots. So the battery is going down faster than it would because I'm cheating and repeating things to tell the truth. One interesting thing that I've just learned, now we're at 90% battery, the amount of regen braking has actually kicked up and you can feel it a little bit more. Just lifting off, I'm not touching the brakes right now and it's just slowing me down to a creep speed. Alright, so we're setting off again, we're off the freeway, back onto surface streets now. And one thing, it still amazes me how easy this is to drive compared with even a Ford F-350, Silverado 3500, and this is a class up. I know cab overs are far more popular in Europe, but especially if you are in any kind of urban setting, to me they make a lot more sense. It's easier to place the vehicle, it takes up less space, and it is easier to maneuver. So, that's the Bollinger. Now, let's go and drive a competitor vehicle. this Isuzu to give me a direct comparison between not just the powertrain but also the general dynamics, NVH, ride, etc. Okay, so we are in the Isuzu now for a comparison. So now we're going to go and take this for a quick drive and see what it's like as a comparison between the two vehicles. Okay, let's head out on the road and see what the impressions are. Steering is similarly weighted. Definitely a lot more vague on center than the Bollinger. Here, this is what I expected. There's a lot more of the typical float around on center, and even only doing 25 miles an hour, I'm putting in a lot more input all the time. First impressions on the ride. Again, the primary ride isn't too bad, although it does feel a little more wallowy. The secondary ride, maybe a touch less harshness on some of the bigger bumps and that, but it does come with more secondary motion. You might not feel it, but you feel it oscillating a lot more afterwards, and it takes time to die down. So driving around like this, there is definitely a lot more body motion in pitch and roll. It's moving around a lot. Vertical motion, the initial harshness is maybe a little better, but it does feel like it's then playing a little bit of catch up, where the powertrain's obviously more than up to it, just as with the Bollinger. The difference is just the hesitation and that, as you'd expect, normal torque converter in this versus the direct drive with the electric instantaneous. And that bump we went over was definitely better in the Bollinger. I really think I almost left the seat there. So the brakes. Initial feel is similar to the Bollinger. The pedal travel is definitely shorter. Modulation, as I say, at the top isn't bad. Modulation at the bottom, I think, is better in the Bollinger, and it is much easier to come to a controlled stop in the Bollinger and avoid head nod. So that is it. My first time driving a cab over, my first time driving anything this big. What do I think? Well, to be honest, I was really surprised. I was amazed at how easy it was to drive the vehicle, place the vehicle, see out of it, modulate the brakes and everything else. Far easier than I expected. And I am also very grateful that I got to drive the Isuzu. That rode and handled far more in keeping with what I was expecting coming into this. The less precise steering and body control are what I expected. I do believe that the ride and handling of the Bollinger will leave the operators feeling much less tired at the end of the day. It is an easier vehicle to place, it's an easier vehicle to drive, and it just doesn't beat you up as much. And that's without really considering the noise side of it. It's just the handling, the steering, and everything else. If I do have any criticisms of the Bollinger, well, I think first of all the brake pedal is long. It is very easy to modulate, as I have said though, and the end of the travel, the lack of head nod and things like that were very nice, but it was a long pedal. As far as the ride is concerned, overall it is far better controlled than the Isuzu. The initial impact of your secondary ride, I do think that is maybe a bit harsh, but it does dampen it out very nicely. In general, I came away very impressed. I did mention earlier it comes as a chassis cab, and there are numerous upfitters around the country in different regions for different needs, so whatever you need, I'm sure you could get it put on there. As I said earlier, these vehicles are now starting to get into the hands of customers. I purposely haven't addressed the price because it is a little bit confusing and it very much depends on where you live. There are a number of different state and federal tax rebates available for vehicles like this, both Class 4 and electric. I believe there is a $40,000 federal credit, and some states can give you back as much as $100,000. That can make these vehicles very attractive for a lot of businesses. Having driven it, I am very impressed with how easy it is to drive compared with its competitor, and I believe Bollinger have a great future, and I wish them the best. All that remains now is a big thank you again to everybody at Bollinger, and please like, subscribe, and pass the word.